You think anyone's drank
Start
out
our
of
third
these?
session, and soon as, here comes Jennifer. Jennifer's going to facilitate this panel
don't see
discussion
any
of
lip
three
marks.
presidents. Jennifer is the Director of Trustee Services at Texas Association of Community Colleges. She's new to Texas. She's come to us from South Carolina. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
I'm a Carolina native, born in North Carolina. We are going to switch up a little bit this morning. I think you've heard a great amount of information from our previous panelists. You'll be happy to know we have no slides, so we can probably turn those off. We won't have any graphs, charts, or any data. So we want to have a nice conversation this morning and emphasizing a few very important points for you as new and experienced trustees. And community colleges governing board policies are what provides the guidelines for the college to accomplish its goals, which include student success and learning, while also satisfying the educational needs of each of your specific communities. All of the board policies align with the college's defined vision, mission, and strategic plan, as you've heard this morning. So the mission and vision do guide the college's CEO with standards that you set for ethics and judgment to manage the fiscal and human resources of your institutions. Each college board does have the ultimate fiduciary responsibility to your institution and your constituency. However, the day-to-day operations are properly delegated to your administration. Today, there are three respected panelists who will share how they have successfully executed their fiscal policies by the board to ensure that the colleges allocate institutional resources to student success and institutional effectiveness. I'd like to begin with Dr. Dusty Johnson, president of Vernon College, who will tell us a little bit about your college, any trustees that you may have here with us in the room, and tell us how you help your board of 7 understand their role of fiscal oversight.
It's my turn.
Yes, Dusty, that's you.
If this was a faculty meeting at Vernon College, I'd say, y'all gather around a little closer, but we're going to let you stay spread out. A little bit about Vernon College, real short and sweet, because I know on time issues. Vernon College is, for those of you who do not know, it's in Wilbarger County, halfway between Fort Worth and Amarillo, 25 miles south of the Red River, and 50 miles west of Wichita Falls. That may help you the best, 50 miles west of Wichita Falls. We have 2,995 students this fall. And similar to some of the earlier speakers, 90% of those students are not in district. 10% are in district. We serve 12 rural counties, and 66% of those students are in one of those counties, which is not rural, which is Wichita County, the home of Wichita Falls. 7th smallest enrollment, 3rd smallest tax base, and 9th highest tax rate. And I'm very familiar with those because I'm having to repeat those all the time to get people's attention. Compared to some of the budgets you just heard in the last presentation, would be considered small. We have a $21 million budget, but what's relevant to that is that a number of things that you already heard about, but only $2.1 million of that comes from the tax base. So you saw some pretty interesting numbers today on tax bases. You did not see them from Vernon College. Yes. But how do I help my board members? What's also interesting, I have since being hired, and I'm one of those kind of guys that talks quite a bit, and I remind my board every July that the ones that hired me aren't there anymore. And I hope that the ones that are there will share with me if they think I'm doing a good job or not. Because I have one person in the first year, 2 in their 3rd year, 2 in their 5th year, and I'm in my 6th year, 1 in his 13th year, and 1 in his 25th year. So it's a very interesting board mix and a very interesting amount of institutional knowledge and board member knowledge when you have that mix. So what do? Well, based on I tell people I'm no smarter than anybody else, but I have 34 years of on-the-job learning experience. And based on that experience, I do a significant one-on-one new board member orientation. And I tell them very plainly that their number one job is to hire a good president. And if I'm not it, send me on down the road and get them a good one. Because it is that simple. That's the president's job is, in my opinion, to run the college on a day-to-day basis. And the board's biggest job is to hire a good president, in my opinion. And that's backed up by other opinions as well. The orientation includes everything I can possibly put together in a packet to share with them about what all has gone on at this institution for 42 years. And how can you put 42 years of institutional knowledge and accomplishments into a 3 or 4 hour orientation is pretty hard. But we try to do that with each and every new board member, one-on-one orientation, and then also another orientation with myself and the board chair. So it works out pretty good that way. We provide them a lot of data. We provide them the policy and procedure manual that we all have, and I know you all read it devotedly, and I point out the highlights of it. We point out a lot of THECB data, a lot of IPEDS data, a lot of ACCT data, and mainly from ACCT, I appreciate ACCT materials on board and board governance. I think it's a lot of good information, and I want to make sure those board members have that right off the bat. We do an annual retreat in July, and the morning of that retreat, about 3.5 hours, is devoted to board governance and roles and responsibilities. I choose every other year to bring in an outside consultant to share that information. I don't believe it's my job to tell a board member how to be a board member. I think if they'll listen to consultants, then that works out real good. A lot about roles and responsibilities, and then we finally get to the budget process.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I'll now introduce Dr. Bill Holden of Kilgore College and ask him to let us know how he has worked with his board to effectively and efficiently run his institution. Dr. Holden?
So Kilgore College is in the piney woods. Sometimes they say behind the pine curtain. The college has 20 independent school districts in its service area, but 7 in its taxing district. Those 7 independent school districts in the tax district used to mirror the geologic formation of the Great East Texas oil field. So it was very strategically picked in a lot of ways. And in the days when oil was blowing and going in that field, the Kilgore College was one of the 5 probably wealthiest colleges in the state. And during that era, the idea was not to build up a lot of reserves. It was just to keep tuition low, keep taxes low, and live off the oil. And they did for a long, long time. And then, so I'm in my 40th year at the college and my 19th year as president, so I've been there for a long time, and I've seen the cycles. And our oil field depleted, and our tax base went from $4.3 billion down to $1.6 billion. And that was really significant, because then you have to start considering as a board, do you raise taxes or tuition and fees, or both? And to what extent do you also cut budgets? I mean, because that's a piece of it also. So thank goodness that tax base is back up to $4 billion. But from what you heard this morning, the landscape is very uneven in the state of Texas in terms of how budgets are structured and what those proportions are. And so there's no one right way for a college to do it except what's right for them. So for example, because our 7 independent school districts only provide about 24% of our student population that's in district, our board is very reluctant to raise local ad valorem taxes for the 70-some% of our students benefit who, they do pay that out of district fee, but they don't pay any ad valorem taxes. And so as a result, our ad valorem taxes are about 11-12% of our total budget, and maybe 15% of our operating budget if you take out Pell Grants and federal funds. And our tuition, in-district tuition, is 6th lowest in the state, So it's about $60 a credit hour, and it's more than double that for out of district. So one of the things that I like to use as an analogy is the John Carver model of policy governance, where he describes that relationship of the administration to the board this way. He says, imagine a long hallway with a door at the end. The door at the end, where that door is the board's role. Where do we want to go? We want fiscal stability. We want overall fiscal responsibility. The administration has to walk down that hallway to get to that door. And the hallway has walls, so there are limitations. You can't just do anything. And those limitations might be, we want to build, don't deplete our fund balance, or we're not going to spend more than we take in, and on and on. So those are the limitations. And and you have to understand your culture. You know, we joke, but it's true. Culture eats strategy for breakfast every day of the week. And so the culture of a community college and a community college board is critical to understand, because, you know, I mean, Lone Star passed a $400 million bond issue. Austin passed one. It's very difficult to get a bond issue in East Texas passed. Not just public schools for building a new school, but there hasn't been an approved expansion of a community college district since Henderson County added Terrell and became Trinity Valley Community College back in the 80s. And I don't know of, other than Panola College passing a tax bond issue, I don't know of any, and Tyler, which is a little different community, but I don't know of any other East Texas community that has actually successfully passed any kind of bond issue. So, and Pam Anglin could tell you, she was trying to expand one little part of her district, and people rented signs that said, taxes are forever, tuition's just 2 years. So here's the kind of strategic things that I think really make sense in that relationship between the board and administration. So a couple of years ago, several of our board members actually went and talked to leadership in the Longview, Texas, which is our largest out-of-district pocket of folks. And the leadership at that time said, we know we need to be in your district, but it's not going to happen. So just load it on tuition and fees. So consciously, our board has always tried to, if we raise tuition $1, we raise out-of-district fee $2. So that net increase is $3 for an out-of-district student. And so that's an example of, that's not the big strategic plan of the college. So our mission statement says we prepare students for success in life by offering educational opportunities that have high quality, great value, easy access, and community focus. So when we go through a budget process and setting up the big goals, that's the things we should be asking ourselves. Is this contributing to student success? And if so, how? I applaud Alamo. I heard they had hired 40 new advisors in the whole system to meet that need to provide a 350 to 1 ratio of advisors to students. I mean, God bless them, they got the money and could commit it, but there's an example of where they reallocated resources to match a student success agenda and a mission. And so that's really the challenge I think that we face constantly, because as you saw from those previous slides, you know, if state revenue is not going to go up, and if tuition and fees have their limits, and local tax rates have their limits, then how do you build a long-term sustainable plan? And we struggle with that every day. So here's the strategic direction the board gives us. We can talk later about the mechanics and how they do it. But one of the things our board historically didn't want to do was incur much debt. So other than about $1 million balance left on a $6 million bond issue back in '97, that's the only debt we have at the college. We keep about 4 months operating expense in what we call an unrestricted reserve, which is a contradiction in terms, but that's what it is. It's a reserve fund. And the board has given us a threshold to try to keep $2 million in the plant funds or plant reserves for projects and that type of thing. We did $26 million of building renovations over a 10-year period with no debt, all out of current funds. So that's just the culture. You're in East Texas. It's a conservative culture fiscally and socially and in a lot of ways. And so the board really helps us set those directions. Just mechanically, real quickly, we have a investment committee that meets at minimum of quarterly, and we discuss all those fund balances and goals with them. They make reports to the board gets monthly reports. We can talk about the details later.
Thank you, Dr. Holda. And to complete our introductions, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Millicent Ballack and her college, Brazosport, which is one of the 10 finalists of the Aspen Institute Awards Community College Excellence. And so I would like to share that and recognize that achievement, and we wish you luck. And please give us some examples of how you share information with your board.
For those of you who may not be familiar with where Brazosport College is, because you won't find the word Brazosport on a map. I know when I applied for the job, I kept looking for it. But it is located about 50 miles south of Houston, and the Brazos River enters into the Gulf of Mexico there at Freeport, so I think the whole area is referred to as Brazosport. So we're considered a medium-sized college, but a single campus. Our board operates as a board of the whole, so we don't have a finance committee or a facilities committee, so everything we do regarding budgeting, strategic planning, and those sorts of things are done by the board together. I think the critical things for our board have been to have board workshops in which we really look at futures. That includes both strategic planning initiatives and, of course, what the financial future looks like. We've had some near crises over the past couple of years that really tuned us into wanting to look very closely at the financial future. And with that, we developed what we're calling a sustainability model. And some of the key features in that model that we look at are what are the recurring costs that we know we will have to plan for year after year. And a good example of that might be what you're going to do with your compensation system, because our board has implemented a market-driven compensation system where every other year we go out to market, survey the market, and then they've pegged the percentage of the market they want the middle percentile to be at. So we know about what percent increase that's going to cost us, except now the market's moving faster than we anticipated, so sometimes those planning assumptions go out the door, and it costs you more than you even thought. Another good example would be, what do you think is going to happen in your net assessed valuation of your district? And you know, there was a time when it was dropping. That time has turned around, but then you have to look at the impact of what is your board decisions been about tax abatements. In our community, we have a lot of wonderful opportunities going on right now. However, to be part of that economic development, we've abated all the new taxes. So while we have $4 billion expansion plan for one chemical company and another $14 billion for another, we've abated them for 10 years. So we know at the end of those 10 years, it's a good thing, and we know there will be other growth along the way, but it's made it hard because with that comes more demand for services in technical areas. So it's kind of a art form where you have to look at all the variables, weigh them against each other, and try to come up with what might work. For us, we have debt service. We have debt service on both a general obligation bond that we passed in 2007, and we have some revenue bond debt from an earlier expansion. And now we're doing a very small expansion, and we're toying around with how we can do some interim financing on that. And it's not a large enough amount to use revenue bond funding. So that's our next strategy, because we do a lot of private fundraising to build buildings there. So those are some of the things that we do as a board, but I think the most useful thing is just that annual workshop. It's a real way to get into understanding not just the budget, but also what's driving the college. You know, you have our regular board meetings, but during those board meetings, you're so busy and your goal is to get through it and get home to watch the football game because they're on Monday nights. And so they sometimes don't get into depthy discussions, but when we meet in workshop, we really put that time in. The other thing we've tried to do during the budget season is add several pre-board meetings just to focus on a single topic, which might be where we are in the budget. Another interesting thing we put in that sustainability model as an example of those things that are kind of multiple year, and what do you look at, is a succession plan figure. I looked at our staff at the senior level, and we had probably 3/5 of the cabinet had put in 40 years of service. And so all of a sudden you're going, okay, how do we plan a succession where we can bring in somebody while they're still here and groom them? Well, that's overhiring. And we made that commitment to do that a number of years ago, and it has really paid off. Because that's a huge thing when you have that much institutional knowledge at the leadership level all exiting at the same time.
Thank you. It's evident that the relationship of the CEO with the board is so important in monitoring your institutional performances. And the board has specific obligations which are outlined by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, or SACS. So each of you have defined your key principles in monitoring your finances of your board. But let's say, monthly, you were talking, Mimi, about how you're trying to get out, but it's important that trustees do monitor certain things. Can you give us some ideas of what trustees need to really pay attention to assure that they are making sure that the college is fiscally stable and holding up their obligations to their constituency and your students?
Well, one part of every board's agenda is always going to be a financial report, and your CFO generally does that. So I think that's very appropriate for the board to look at that, use their knowledge, or even just if they have questions about it, to say why is there this difference between the actual and the budget? Why are you spent this much when we're only this far into the year? Those sorts of things. What is our cash position? For regents that are new or trustees that are new, I think one of the big learning curves is learning how our money flows, because we don't get our money on a monthly basis. State appropriations come in intervals, tuition comes in at one time, then there's a long gap where there's none, and then taxes come in a lump sum, and then there's none. So it's real hard to understand that cash flow, and I think that's an important part of understanding the position of your college. I think good questions to say are, have we as a board established what we want as our rainy day fund or our net assets? How many months of operating expenses do we think we need to be fiscally sound? What is our net asset balance? How is it going to affect any bond ratings? Because that's another important thing. If you do have debt, whether it be revenue or general obligation, the amount of money you have in your net assets can have an effect on what your bond rating is. So all of those sorts of things are good, but at the end of the day, you have to go back to remembering your only employee is the president. The staff provide the information to you. The other arm that you have is by law, you hire an auditor. The auditor audits, the auditor reports to the board. So those are the appropriate roles, as, setting the budget and the tax rates are all part of that. But what I'm saying as far as oversight, use your auditor, rely on your president, and if you can't get the information you need, ask, but don't get down into, well, let me have an Excel spreadsheet and see if I can do some of this, because you're not the CFO. And that's sometimes a difficult role to learn, because you may have lots of talent in that area, but it's real difficult for a college or a board if everybody's trying to accomplish the same task and come up with it a different way.
And Dr. Johnson, I think I'm assured by the CFO from Austin saying all CEOs watch the college like a hawk. So we know that that's so important even in the larger colleges. Can you give a perspective from a smaller college?
What's interesting, written in front of me here says you need a competent, trusted CFO. And I have one, fortunately, at Vernon College. And it is very important. And then the second thing I've written, and I pledge this to my board, is that I will know the budget as well as the CFO. And that can be interesting sometimes. Fortunately, in my current situation, the CFO and I are get along very well, and we go through the budget weekly, if not and monthly, but usually weekly. So it's very important, and they have to have confidence. It does take time, but the second thing on our monthly agenda is the financial report, and most of us give a month-to-month and a year-to-date financial report. And we don't mind, if I don't mind, and my board doesn't seem to mind, if that takes a little longer than we anticipated, because of the things we do, that fiduciary responsibility is very important. And then we move into those other things on the board agenda. Just wrote this down to brag a little bit. We're going to get our audit next month, and I've been there 6 years, and it'll be our 5th clean, unqualified, with no management comment audits. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens with your whole administrative team, your deans, your directors, your faculty, everybody paying attention to your policies, procedures, processes, and making sure that the money's well taken care of.
And Dr. Holda, you have shared your long history with your college, so I'd like to ask you about some new funding formula and foundations for the distribution of state appropriations. So this is new to us. It's kind of hard to talk about because some of it we are just recognizing how it's going to impact each of the individual colleges. But we did hear from Wharton and McLennan Community College CEOs this morning. They outlined this new distribution model, and it allows for state appropriations to include 3 components: our core operations, the $1 million per individual community college, and the 50 throughout the state, the student success points, and the traditional contact hour funding. So what effect has this had on your college, and can you explain?
So for us, it has not, the change has not had a significant impact yet, and it's still in its early stages. What I will say is this, that for colleges that have a small base, and I'm thinking, for example, Clarendon, Frank Phillips, Western Texas, to some extent, Vernon, Panola, others, that core funding of $1 million per biennium, in some cases, is 25% of their total revenue. So it's very significant in providing stability with a dramatic change in enrollment and state funding. For colleges like Austin, Houston, Lone Star, it's probably less than 0.5% when you look at their total budget. So it was more of an equalizing force for smaller institutions, and so the smaller you are, the more significant that piece is. Regarding the success points, there's something that everybody needs to stop and think about. You get $185 a point, but the point is a win. So if a student exits developmental, you get $185. If they get into the first college level, successfully complete the first college level math class, $185. They first language arts class, same thing. So in that matrix that's there that goes from one side to the other, the various points that are assigned to each measure that you achieve are also tied to raw numbers. So if you've had an enrollment decline, then you may also have a decline in your success points, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your institution is not doing a better job with success. So you might have improved your success, but because of enrollment declines, your numbers in that category still go down. We've had some statistician-type folks run some numbers, run some models, and you would have had the same decline in your enrollment-based numbers based on the old traditional headcount formula contact hours. So right now, we're not seeing a significant negative impact with the success point model, the performance-based funding. You might be aware of this. There are 50 community college districts, and 36 or 38 of them this fall had a decline in enrollment, and 10 of them had a decline greater than 10% or greater. So, you have a couple that had 17% declines, but when you can go into the oil field and drive a truck and make $100,000, it's really tempting to say, I can go to school anytime. I can't make this kind of money anytime. And so we're seeing that throughout a lot of the state through all the community colleges. And that sort of ties into that presentation David Gardner gave this morning about how the community college numbers are down, but the university numbers are actually up. And I think that these things cycle out, and eventually we'll see where they are. In terms of the Success Point funding, we're going to evaluate that process, watch it closely, and then if it needs tweaked, we'll do that in coordination with the coordinating board. Marie had asked earlier this morning about, with those lines that project all that decline in state funding, if we're giving up on that. We're not. Our actual request for this session is about $200 million above what we had last legislative session. And I know the East Texas folks met with our senator, and he didn't think that was going to be a big problem. He thought that was doable. So I hope he's right.
I do too.
But I don't think the new funding model is going to create much of a burp, but it did a lot for us politically because there were entities around the state that were really pushing to put in performance-based funding, and historically there'd been all this resistance, and they were really angry at the university community after the last session because they had subverted those moves. And so what the universities get for building buildings is TRBs, tuition revenue bonds, and a lot of what we're hearing is they're not going to approve any TRBs unless the universities embrace performance-based funding. So we got a lot of our grunge out of the way last session between proportionality, health benefits, retirement, and this change in funding. So I think it's important, though, that we continue to report to you as trustees how we're doing on the student success piece. Where those points go up and where they go down, which of those are attributable to enrollment changes versus where we are or are not moving the needle on student success.
Dr. Johnston, I'd like to know if you concur or possibly have a different opinion. I would love to know.
Oh, that whole deal?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I concur completely
good.
with my good friend Bill Hoda. As a small rural college, we did benefit from the cooperations compared to in the previous times. We'd been a school that might or might not receive the small institutional supplement, which is a formula that I cannot describe to you, but I've been in many arguments about. The performance funding itself, I think I'm also concurring. The end product on that is what it says about us, not what money it generates. Yeah, I saw too many studies, too many really smart guys doing research on it, statistical research that really shows that the impact at the end of the day is not going to be much different to us, which was a fear early on. But it said so much to the legislature and to our constituents that we were willing to take that on, that's the overriding value to it.
And Dr. Valak, as one of the 10 finalists for Aspen Institute, I have to ask, how do you feel?
About core funding and
No,
student success?
about the Aspen Institute, of
Oh,
course,
that-
I'm kidding. No,
Well,
yes, ma'am, about the new
ask me in
funding.
March.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, how are you relating to your board this new funding formula?
Well, you have to understand that's 10% of what we're talking about. And we haven't had an impact yet because they've only done the base year. So this year will tell. I think the key thing is whether the legislature continues to fund it at the current rate. Because what's happened with contact hour funding is as colleges grew, the money in the pool did not grow at the same rate, so the amount given for contact hours decreased. Well, if colleges become more successful and the pool for student success points remains the same, it'll be deja vu. So all of the things we're doing for student success points are the right things to do, the measures along the way, total agreement with them. And the finance part following it probably is not a motivator. It's not a demotivator. It's just kind of a non-issue because they're the right things to do. The core operations, though, I think was one of the best things that our association lobbied for and won because it has provided a nice, stable base proportionate to your size. And I'm really grateful to the larger districts who understood how important that was to their colleagues.
Thank you.
Jen,
And
could I add one thing, just because we're
Well,
talking to
please.
new board members?
Please.
It's my understanding, and these guys can correct me, that the other value to that whole system, in my opinion, was the first time in nearly 40 years there had been any significant change to the structure of the distribution of money. And that was a giant thing. I mean, it was pretty much static for 40 years. And then all of a sudden, we have a new concept that seems to be working.
And I'll say that in the less than 2 years I have been here in Texas, it's important to note that this work was done with a unified voice of both the presidents and trustees, and that's monumental because that makes such a great impact. You can hear us say, and these are the experts here, that we don't know what some of these things will mean, but there are some very strong overarching principles that they have shared with you this morning. I think you feel confident, I feel very confident that our colleges are being run in a properly guided, with your board oversight. So let me just say, the board oversight is what guides these CEOs, and their judgments are based on your principles. So your strategic plan, your mission, and your vision are what will be carried out on the budget level. So I will ask them to each conclude and give any new or experienced board members any advice on how they give you those instructions to implement the budget and remain out of the day-to-day operations, yet still be responsible to your constituents and ultimately your students. Dr. Holden?
So I think the landscape is real uneven between boards that function the way they function, and even within individual boards. So if you think about your own board, there's some people who are very interested in the details and some who really aren't. Some just want the big 30,000-foot, picture. So accept the fact that boards have their own dynamic and that they're very, very different. And within the board themselves, there's different levels of curiosity and/or financial acumen. So once you understand that, then this is just coming from me, in my opinion, there are some basics that every board member should pay attention to, regardless of how detailed they want it or not. And so at a minimum, I think every board member should assure that their institution has financial stability. That stability is mirrored in what you look at in reserves, in consistency from year to year, in planning for special projects, in paying attention to the 2 columns on your annual audit that show last year and this year, and if there are real aberrations, understand those. At the end of the year, when a fiscal year is closed, have some sense of how the year finished, depending on the level of board involvement, how much money's transferred from accounts to accounts, and I mean, like large amounts, and what kind of notice did we have for major projects that are going to need funding? And when someone comes and says we got, a major HVAC system in a building that needs replaced, the appropriate question is, so how are we going to pay for that? Do we have the funds to do we have the funds to hire 40 advisors? That's a big deal. So what I would say is as boards, I encourage you to set at least some minimum standards to assure that your institution has what I would call good long-term fiscal stability, and pick half a dozen real common markers that are common to that kind of oversight, and at a minimum, encourage all of you to encourage all your board members to at least get into that level. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Dr. Johnston, any advice to new and experienced trustees?
In respect to all the people that work hard the last several years at Vernon College, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we're talking about budgeting, but something you've heard in every presentation this morning is the importance of the planning process. The plan should drive the budget. And the amount of, we probably spend more time at Vernon College in the actual planning process prior to the budgeting process, and that's by choice that we do that. And that includes board involvement in not only your long-range plan, but also your what we call our annual action plan. And then when you get there, one I share with them all the time is that a budget is simply an estimate of a series of choices. And that choices were developed in your plan. So I'd leave it there.
Thank you. Dr. Valley?
For new trustees, I would say probably the best advice is ask when you have a question. And at our college, what we try to encourage is that trustees ask the president the question or the board chair the question. And I'm talking when we're talking about questions outside of board meetings. Of course, in a board meeting, everybody is talking together. The other thing you need to realize is that, and this is sometimes hard to remember, is that as a board member, you have such a different role now in the eyes of all the employees of the college that if you were to just directly call one of the staff and ask a question, it has such a different weight than it did the day before you became a regent. And so that really is not a good thing to do from that perspective, because they will immediately think that a question you asked is a directive. And as a single board member, you have no power. You only have power as a board, but the perceptual power is there. And so those sorts of things can really cause dysfunction among a board, and that doesn't need to be there. So we talk about our communication, and that's probably been the strategy that's been the best. Just a real practical one is that we hold our board meetings in the evening, and on the day of the board meeting, I always make sure that everyone knows I'm in my office, available for any questions or phone calls about the agenda all day long. And I say that because, a lot of times that's when you get around to reading your agenda is at that teachable moment. So, and I welcome those calls and they've been very good about it because I said, they don't want to embarrass the staff with a question they can't answer if there needs to be some research. And if there's a question they have, the answer to it is something the whole board may be interested in. So that's just been a good little technique that's worked for us.
I think that's a great note to end on, because if you do have a question, first off, these are the people to come to, and transparent communication and strategic planning are important. And so use the line of communication with your CEO and your board chair. And I'm sure all of your answers will be provided. And I know that one thing is for certain, the CEO and the board both share one goal, and that is student success, institutional stability, and enhancing your communities. So I'd like to open the floor to any questions that you may have.
Dr. Malik, you mentioned 3 board meetings. Could you elaborate on what that is?
It's just a practice, because of busy schedules, our board meets at 6:30. If we have a topic that we want to do a deep dive on, like one session, we may come at 5 and have it just focus on a single topic. One time we had one just on what are our internal control systems. And so we could go through what we have within the college. And we maybe do 2 or 3 of those a year. Sometimes it may be on a student success initiative. Sometimes it may be just on where we are in the budget at that time. But it allows it to be in more of a discussion environment.
And one thing you'll hear about this afternoon is a new paradigm with larger colleges with a certain number of enrollment that have their board meetings simulcast and videotaped. So make sure you understand that going in, but also keep true to what your role is as a trustee. Don't wear your nice new tie and a new hat, right, Mimi? So anything else that you would like to share with us as panelists today?
Good.
Okay.
Thank you for your service, because it is service, seriously.
Thank you. And it's nice to see a lot of new trustees here in the audience today. Thank you.